Perek Chaf Aleph, Mishnah Aleph. We're now moving on to a perek which deals with the topic of muktzah, and Mishnah will discuss each new principle as we encounter it. Says the Mishnah, No tel Adam es beno, a person may pick up his son, v'ha'even b'yodei, even though the son is holding a stone, which is muktzah, he's allowed to pick up his son. V'chalkala, similarly a person is allowed to pick up a basket, v'ha'even b'socha, even though the basket has a stone in it. Now, the Gemara qualifies this and explains that we're talking about a specific scenario where the son has ga'guin, is longing for the father. The Gemara says that we're talking about a case of a tineg sheyesh le'ga'guim al ovid, which means that unless the father picks him up, he'll get ill. Rashi says it's not a case of pikuach nefesh, it's a regular case of chole, but nonetheless, given the muktzah is d'rabbanan, and the father is not actually touching the muktzah directly, he's rather holding the child, who in turn is holding this even, this stone. So therefore, Chazal, in a situation of where the son would get sick, would be allowed to pick up this son, if he's got gagu, if he's longing for his father. However, the Gemara does say that if the son was holding a coin, then we would not allow the father to pick him up, because we would be concerned that the son might drop the coin, and the father in turn would pick it up and therefore would touch the muktzah directly. What Chazal allows is indirect tiltul, indirect touching of the muktzah by holding the son who is holding the even. And of course we're talking about an even which has not been designated for any specific use, and therefore is of course muktzah. Similarly, you're allowed to be metaltel, to hold, to be noitel, the kalkula, this basket, v'ha'even b'socha, there is an even in it. Now the Gemara gives two ukimtas, two possible situations of what the Mishnah is referring to. One is that the stone there is a hole in the basket, and the stone is used to fill the hole in the basket, and therefore it becomes part of the structure of the basket itself, and therefore it's not considered muktzah. Alternatively, the Gemara says that the basket contains heta items, fruit and the like, and therefore when it contains fruit and the stone, then we come on to the topic of something which is called a basis l'davar ha'asa v'hamuta. A basis literally means a base. Maybe it comes from that word, that the basket itself is a base for things which it holds, which are asa and which are muta. The stone which is in the basket, or the coin which is in the basket, is of course mukta, but the fruit in the basket is muta. And the halacha is that a basis l'davar ha'asa v'hamuta is actually okay to move. It's a similar principle to the candlesticks that we use on our Shabbos tables, that the tray itself of the candlesticks is a basis for the candlesticks, for the candles and candlesticks. And therefore, by putting on a siddur, tehillim, or chalas, or wine on the actual tray, the tray becomes a basis l'davar ha'asa v'hamuta, and therefore, once the candles are out, you can actually move the tray. That's why we do that. It's the same principle. And therefore, the Gemara says that the Mishnah is referring to a kalkula which has an even besoch, which is a basis l'davar ha'asa v'hamuta. The Shulchan Aruch brings down both of these two pshatim, and in Siman Shin Tes, halacha base, it brings the first pshat. Kalkula shahois nekuva sosma be'even, a basket which had a hole in it, and one plugs the gap with a stone. Mutal letaltla is mutal to move that on Shabbos. And then in the next halacha, in halacha gimel, it says kalkula melea peiros ve'even b'soicha. You've got a basket full of fruit with a stone inside it. You've got the basis l'davar ha'asa v'hamuta. Imheim peiros retuvin, which we're going to discuss shortly. If they're wet fruit, then you can move it, etc., etc. So both explanations of the Gemara are brought in halacha in the Siman Shintes, halacha base and gimel. Now, the Bar Tanura qualifies this case from the Gemara, qualifies the case of when you're allowed to carry the basket. We're talking about a case which contains fruit that would become soiled if you were just to tilt them out. If you were to tilt the basket and spill the fruit out, that is a preferred course of action, and you should not be carrying the basket. But we're talking about a case where the fruit would actually become soiled. So says the Bar Tanura, v'ha'even b'socha, v'hu sheyu peris basar, where there are fruit in the basket. Shem ein peris, because if there were no fruit in the basket, if the basket merely held this even, then you wouldn't be able to touch it, because na'aseh basis l'davar ha'osa, it would become a basis for something which itself is osa, v'osa l'taltal, and therefore the basis itself, the basket, the base itself would become osa. V'tzorich nami, at further condition, says the Bartanura, she'yu b'soichu peiros, that the fruit inside, she'im yishlach yashlichem ba'aretz, if you were to spill them onto the ground, yimosel, they would become dirty and disgusting. Going tutin v'anovim, for example, berries, v'anovim and grapes, v'kiyetz v'im, soft, sort of juicy fruit. Aval im hoyu boy peiros, if they have fruit in it, could go in egoizim v'shkedim, like nuts, almonds, menayas ha-peiros, v'im you should tilt out, spill out the fruit, and they would fall onto the ground, and then you would be able to take the fruit. Or peiros hanimosim nami, and furthermore, even peiros hanimosim, fruit that would become soiled if they were spilled out onto the ground, going tutim v'anovim, like berries and grapes, im efshel lesalkim letzadei hakilkra, if you could move them to the side of the basket, ulenai ha'even levado, and move the stone, ulashlicha, and to spill it out, osa letaltalim or even, it would be osa to move it with the even. So if you haven't got those two conditions, then you've got a problem. But if you've got, so long as you've got soft fruit or you cannot move it over, then it would be mutter to actually hold and to carry the basket. Okay. The Mishnah continues. Umetaltalin truma tamea im ha-tahora v'im ha-chulin. You're allowed to move contaminated truma. In other words, truma which became tameh, if it's together with truma which is tahor, or together with regular chulin. Now again, we're talking about a case of a basis. So you've got like a basket or a tray which has truma tameh on it, and it also has truma tahora, or it has truma tameh with chulin. You're allowed to move the whole basket because it's a basis l'davar ha'osa v'hamuta. Now the Gemara qualifies it as follows. The Gemara says we're specifically talking about a case where the truma tameh is at the top. Because if the truma tameh was at the bottom and the truma tahora or the chulin was on top of it, there'd be no shayla. You would just be able to take the chulin or the truma tahora. So we're clearly talking about a case where the truma tameh is at the top, and therefore you're allowed to move it because you can't access the truma tahora any other way. Furthermore, we're talking about a case where you cannot spill out the contents of the basket onto the floor. For example, we're talking about wet fruits or retuvim, juicy things which become soiled, grapes, berries, etc. Because if we were talking about dried produce, you would just tilt them out onto the floor and take the things which are chulin. So that's how the Gemara explains this part of the Mishnah. Concludes the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, you're allowed to remove one part of truma from a mixture of 100 parts of ordinary food. Now what does this mean? We know that truma is bottled in 1 in 100, which means that if 1 part truma falls into 100 parts of chulin, then it's bottled and the actual contents can be eaten by a regular non-kohen. However, Chazal did say that you need to take away 1 part, the kohen shouldn't lose out, that he shouldn't lose his property rights, i.e. the truma. So you just have to remove 1 part, and then the remaining parts are mutter because it's bottled. If 1 part truma fell into a quantity, a mixture of less than 100, then the whole thing would become truma and it cannot be eaten by a zar, by a non-kohen. But we're talking about a case where 1 part truma falls into a mixture of more than 100 parts chulin. Now the shaila is this: can you repair this? Can you fix this? Remove 1 part on Shabbos to facilitate, to enable a zar, a non-kohen, to eat the mixture, which is chulin. So the Tanna Kama says you can't, because it's nirek mesakin. It looks like you're repairing, you're fixing this mixture. By taking out 1 part, you now can eat the chulin. That's considered fixing it, and therefore you're not allowed to. Rabbi Yehuda does allow you to do it, and that's what the Mishnah means. You're allowed to remove 1 part because the mixture now is bottled. You remove 1 part, and now you can fix it. Now there are 2 ways to learn pshat in this, why Rabbi Yehuda allows you to do this. The Gemara explains, because you don't actually have to physically remove 1 part for the truma. Rather, all you have to do is think it. You just have to say that you designate in your mind 1 little part of the mixture, and the rest you can start eating already. And since that's not done in a physical way, you're not actually physically removing 1 of the parts, but just mentally you have in mind, by machshava, to remove 1 part and to designate 1 part as truma. Therefore, it's not considered nirek and mesakein, as if you're fixing or rectifying it according to for the onlooker who just walked past. He can't read your mind. So that's how the Gemara understands it. The Bartanura has a slightly different explanation. He says that since it's it's bottled and therefore it's lost its status as truma and it's just merely protecting the property rights of the kohen, therefore it's the law, the halacha presumes that that one part has already been removed, and the first thing that you take is already just is considered the truma that fell in, and therefore it's not considered the proper tikkun. That's how the Bat Nura understands it. But either way, the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda. The halacha would be like the Chachamim, who would not allow you to remove one part to facilitate a zar, non-kohen, eating the remainder of the mixture, which is chulin. That is the end of Mishnah Aleph.